Okay, and we get white for the first time. We had 3 games with black in a row, maybe 4. And we're getting an Alakine. So we don't get to play a direct King's Indian attack if we wanted to, but we can do that still with D3. And I'm going to opt for D3. I'm just going to go for King's Indian attack setups. Just because we haven't really gotten any. And I really want to play this type of setup. So whether or not they play... Okay. And against D5, what we're going to want to do is just play knight D2. And if they take, we just take back with the pawn. So normal setup so far. We could also play E5. I don't think that's incorrect at all either. Now E5 would be bad. This would be very bad. Should I play H3 here? H3 is something we're going to generally play H3 or H4 in the King's Indian attack anyways, so it's not going to hurt us if we do that. If I play H3, there is a problem with it though. If they take, and I take with the knight, all of a sudden they're winning a pawn. And if I take with the queen, knight D4 might be annoying. I have to play queen D1. Sure, I get to play queen D1 and then I'll just play C3 to kick it, but that gives them a tempo. I think we should go into that line anyways, giving them a tempo. So I'm going to play H3. And this is, yeah, maybe a little weird, but looks like it should work out for us. Okay. Bishop H5. There's also G4 ideas. This, I don't know how great it is. I'm wondering if we can take on G4. If we take on G4 and then takes, queen takes, it's equal material. I think we should take on E4, even if we're hesitant to. Their bishop is still attacked, so they have to deal with this in some way. I'm trying to avoid complications. In either the next move or the move after that, I'm looking at a move like C3 to prevent knight D4 altogether. So now's their chance if they really want to play it. They'd end up not going for it. They could have tried some sort of knight D4 variation, but of course we could just kick them away. So I'm just going to go G3, bishop G2, and we're getting our King's Indian setup, except with d-pawns traded. So we're not getting one of those crazy ones, but we should still get a fun position nonetheless, which is exciting. Okay, so I'll just go C3. Happy to get that move in. And we will castle next. Great. So now we have our position. This is essentially, this is actually something that pops up in the King's Indian defense quite a bit, except with the black side, not the white side. So generally in those openings, we bring our queen to C7. So we're going to do that here with bringing the queen to C2. We will bring most likely the knight to C4, play some sort of bishop E3 to neutralize their bishop, and continue our play. And one thing we're hoping for is that they play some sort of C5. If they play C5, we're happy because we have the D5 square to attack, whereas they do not have D4. And that's why C3 is such a useful move, is again, D4, like a move like knight D4 now would be something we'd have to at least consider and talk about. But since there is no knight D4 because of our C3 pawn, we're happy all of a sudden. So it's great. If queen C8 to attack the H3 pawn, there's two considerations, either H4 or king H2. I'm going to choose king H2. And the reason why is because if H4, they can still play bishop H3 anyways, trying to trade off the bishop on G2. And I'm not sure if we want to trade it off yet. In an endgame, I'd be more likely to accept some sort of trade over a light squared bishop. But of course, when we fianchetto a bishop beside our king, it creates light squared weaknesses, or dark squared weaknesses if we were black and fianchettoing here. So yeah, being cognizant of square weaknesses is very important. And I actually think white has a slight advantage here, which is nice. And a big reason is because this knight is kind of misplaced. They want to play some sort of c6, but it's hard to because e5 is going to hang if they ever move the knight. And bishop d6 isn't really tempting either. We could consider knight c4 and taking on d6, giving them a backward pawn on d6 there. It also gives them the opportunity to consider d5, but feels like they have to be a bit more passive here. I'm expecting rook e8. Rook e8's the most natural move. And where would this rook want to go? I don't think anywhere yet. It's very useful defending the f2 pawn. Because again, if they play queen c8 and we play king h2, f2 is defended. If we end up moving the rook, like rook d1, all of a sudden queen c8 causes a serious problem where we can't actually play king h2 as f2 falls. This move I think we're not really scared of. But we should still give it some thought. Do we play g4 if they play h4? Right now they're not actually threatening h4 anyways, because we can take the pawn with the knight. And because of that, I'm looking at moves like a4. I want to play knight c4, but I'm worried that a5 will be annoying. So a4 is one of those preparatory moves similar to a French game that was played in an earlier series, where this is just a nice move to solidify the knight on c4. It just makes it a little bit nicer. The thing is, after a4, they might play bishop e6. And now knight c4 is prevented. So we might have to go for knight c4 now, if we want to go for it at all. Knight c4, if they go b5, e5 does hang. So they're not in time yet. And I think we have to bank on that, which is good for us. So I think knight c4 is the right call. One idea I have is bishop e3, as mentioned before, just because if this bishop gets neutralized, all of a sudden there's no problems with the f2 square at all. King h2 is possible, even rook d1. And also, after bishop e3, we also have rook a to d1, keeping this rook, defending the tender f2 pawn. And it would be opposite our opponent's queen, which is great because, well, it restricts the bishop even further, because now the bishop can't move without the queen behind it falling. We'll have to see what they do, though. One scary thought is if they could somehow just teleport the bishop to b5. The thing is, this is something that was calculated before I played the move, and this is why I was considering a4, is because if they can somehow get bishop to b5 in, it pins the knight to the rook in an uncomfortable way where it's hard to respond to. But luckily, it's just not possible. They have to make two moves in order to do that. So this pawn does hang, but in return, so does this one. I think what we should do is we should play king h2 to defend the pawn on h2, and e5 is still under attack. And again, because we didn't move our f1 rook, f2 is sufficiently defended. So we are extremely happy here. Right now the threat is knight takes e5. I don't really want to exchange on e5, like take on e5. This is something we could do. Take e5, take e5, take e5, and then bishop takes h3. The reason why I didn't want to do it is because it feels like our king's going to get a little weak there. Trading off the h3 pawn and ultimately our light squared bishop for the e5 pawn. Sure, we get more central control, but in return we do get a weaker king. And I care much more about king safety in a position like this. And in general, I think I want to focus more on king safety at these lower levels. So still equal material. There's only one pair of pieces traded off. Not even pieces, but one pair of pawns traded off in this game so far. Now e5 does fall. And I want to take it with this knight, the c4 knight. Because if they play bishop b5, I can just play c4 to kick the bishop off of this diagonal. This is something we're really, really, really happy about. And funnily enough, okay, so knight g6 was played. Do we take on g6 or not? If we don't take on g6, we need another move. There's taking on d7, and I might like that more. Because if we take on d7, well, then we get rid of the light square bishop, and our bishop on g2 is unopposed, which is also the bishop that defends our king. So that's not really a bad situation to be in. I think I'm going to go for this bishop here. This should actually make development easier. If queen takes, then bishop g5, threatening to ruin their pawn structure. Looks like a very strong move. It also further prevents h4. We'll have to see what they do. Yeah, I really like bishop g5 here. I could also consider e5, which forces their knight to move somewhere, but it kind of forces it to jump in the center. Bishop g5 connects the rooks, right? When you're up a pawn or any material, just consider what happens if I just develop my pieces, right? We could consider something crazy like e5 and trying to create complications, but why complicate a position we would be better in if it was quiet, right? Do you want a quiet, better position or a crazy one? And you should always opt for quiet only because it's harder to mess up. It's just practically just a nicer thing to go for. And another thing here that we're doing to keep in mind of is if they move the knight at all, e4 is no longer weak. If they add an attacker, we can remove one of their attackers anyways from the e4 pawn, which means the e4 pawn isn't weak, which is great. Very, very good. Still just hoping for a response. All right, now I like rook to d1. Just attacking the queen, forcing it to move. I'm somewhat expecting the move queen e6. I couldn't fully explain why, but I don't think it's a good move. And the reason why is because if queen e6, we can play knight d4, adding another defender to our e4 pawn, and also attacking their queen again. And a2, I don't care if it falls. I don't even know if you can take it. Because I would be worried about knight f5 after that. Followed by trying to take on e7 there. I'm actually happy to give back the pawn in some sort of way like that, where it's much more than just giving up or giving back the pawn. Now e5 looks really tempting, because if we play e5 here, it forces the knight to move and trades off the dark squared bishops. We could also not do that and play knight d4 anyways. And I think we should just go for the principled move, knight d4. Which means some pieces will still be on the board, but we get a lot of activity. So, trying to play for activity here. Knight g4 check. I think we can just respond with taking. I don't think we're concerned about it. Because if they take, then we get to take on h5 as well. So just something to point out that I probably should have already. But now I did. So it's okay. Okay. Now knight g4 check is a bit more serious. Because if they get knight g4 check in, then if I take it, they take with the other knight first, and then they take on g5. So I think I want to avoid any of that altogether just by playing the very simple move, king to g1. And now with king to g1, I'm looking at knight to f5, as well as moves like f4. Not immediately, there's knight c4, but knight to f5 is very, very tempting. If we can play this move successfully, this could hurt. Thing is, they don't want to move their bishop, and if they defend it, like rook e8, we can take and then take on f6, ruining the structure further. We don't have to follow along like that. What we could do is, or what they could do, is go queen e8. But generally, with our knight on f5, I think we're extremely happy. And if they play a move like g6, which weakens their king side a little bit, I think there's a sufficient reason to be happy about that as well. And that actually is tempting me. If g6, it's tempting me to look at the move f4, followed by f5, trying to open up their king side, because I think we get there first. So that's kind of the, that's the King's Indian attack. We go for king side attacks. Woohoo! We'll have to see what our opponent does first. I'm having flashbacks from an earlier game where I blundered, but still won. So funny. Okay. Actually, wait, does f4 win? f4, the knight has to move. Even if it goes to c4, I just have e5 check, attacking the king and also the knight. I think f4 should win at this point. This is something we should be a little scared of sometimes, but we don't have to be yet, just because, well, we're doing good. Our king is so, like, perfectly defended. Like, there's not really any attacks I can see. The only thing is if they could teleport their knight to e3, they'd be happy about that. Even still, we'd have moves like queen b1 and e5 check, but it's way off the horizon anyways. So we get to attack their knight even further. They have to play knight g8, I think. Yeah, knight g8. Where we can take, and then take on f7, and play moves like e6 and knight f5. This game should be over, I think. Should be over. Thumbs up. Yeah, this rook h8, I'm not sure what the idea was here. I think they were trying to go for some sort of kingside attack on me, but their knight was hanging, and that's much more important than any potential attack they could have created, which didn't really look like it was going to pan out anyways. Because I had more space on this side of the board to begin with the extra pawn on the king side. And that's another thing of the power of extra pawns, is generally when we look at plans in a position, it's, okay, where does one side have more pawns than the other? Like, we might have like a 4 versus 3 on the king side, and then they have a 4 versus 3 on the queen side, meaning they should play on the queen side, we should play on the king side. But when you're up a pawn, you just play on the side where you have that extra pawn, and generally it just does its own work for you. So that's always great. And I'm going to take on f7 here. This is a good pawn. I would love to play knight f5. Because if they take, I can take back with the pawn and then play rook d7 and start taking advantage of the 7th rank here. So that would be good. Okay, and here it's hard to avoid knight f5, which threatens rook g7. And if they go rook g8, I think I'm going to go queen to d2 and set up a nasty. Could I go rook d7? Sure. Actually, maybe because of that, I'm just going to go queen c1, which is just like extra. It's an extra move. Okay, so I'm going to go queen c1 here. And there's a reason why. Can you spot the tactic? There is a tactic in mind with this move. Can you spot it? We will give our opponent time. Maybe they will spot it. I think the only way they can deal with it is by playing king h8. So they do not find the move. Queen h6 is checkmate, because the pawn is actually pinned to the king. So if they play king h8 in this position instead, then queen h6 doesn't work because they can take it. And this move isn't actually that bad either. It looks like just a trick move, but it's not. It's actually allowing moves like rook takes on g7. And also after rook d7, knight takes e5, rook takes g7. It's continuing to threaten these types of checkmates, where if they take somehow, no matter how they take, it's really hard to avoid mate on h6 anyways. So that's the big idea behind the move. It's not just a trick move. But yeah, let's go over the game here. So I don't know if we had to go into this specifically with d3. I did that only because I was trying to get in King's Indian attacks. But we could go e5. This is going to be the more challenging try against the Alekhine. But again, as mentioned before, I was really hoping for a different situation there of avoiding going out of our repertoire, let's say. So, okay, d3 was fine. Knight c6, knight f3. Maybe knight f3 wasn't the best try. Maybe knight d2. I'm curious. Let's turn on... Oh, actually, f4. f4 is good. And the idea of f4 is to go for the King's Indian, but instead we have the pawn on f4 instead of on f2, where we're eventually going to push it to f4. We just do it immediately, play knight f3, g3, bishop g2, and then castle. So this is a great way to deal with that, actually. So if they play something like d6, knight f3, let's say e5, it says bishop e2, which makes sense. I kind of want to just highlight the idea of like some King's Indians. Of course, g3 might not be the most challenging move because they can take. And they haven't really shown where they're going to castle yet. Plus, they have d5, which is an issue. But we can try castling in a position like this. And this is very reminiscent of some sort of King's Indian you might get. The problem is we want their pawn to be actually on d4 first and on c5. Because when they do moves like that, it creates some liabilities for them. But yeah, so f4 was definitely a consideration. Knight f3 looked fine, d5. And yeah, I actually should have pushed e5. I should have done it. Because if knight d7, we have two moves here. We have e6, we actually have a few moves. E6, d4, but I think the more conducive move to our King's Indian attack is actually playing queen e2. And queen e2, our idea is playing g3, bishop g2. Don't mind the engine. Don't mind it, okay? I swear, this is not a bad idea. And again, yeah, we just go for our normal setup with g3. Let's just say bishop e7. f6 has to be played, but let's just say bishop e7, bishop g2. You get a position like this. And I think there's lots to be happy about. Because we get our normal plans of moves like knight d2, h4, h5. And this pretty much just transposes, I think, almost exactly into a regular King's Indian attack. But let's see the game. So knight d2, h3. So my idea here was I was expecting bishop takes, queen takes, knight d4. I wasn't too worried about this because queen d1, we can kick it away with c3. And yeah, looks like this is fine because looking at the evaluation here, it's very, very, very slightly better for white. e5, c3, knight c6, let's say. I like g3, bishop g2. What's being recommended is bishop e2. I just want to, again, stay consistent with the plans of bringing the bishop to g2 here. So this is what I would opt for here. Let them castle long if they want to. That's fine. We will happily castle short, and the game goes on. Yeah, and again, slight advantage to white. And the positions are fun to play, right? Because we go for these f4 breaks. Here, not as much because we don't want to open up our own king for nothing. And the bishop on g2 might not look amazing for the moment, but generally it reroutes, and it can still be our pride and glory. And that's the game.